Hello, it's Mrs. Allison again. Today we are going to look at angle of elevation and angle of depression. And then really what we're going to do is repeat the idea of our trig word problems, just with different wording. There are two types of trig word problems that you will see come up a fair amount. And we looked at one yesterday, although the information was all given to us, so it was pretty easy to determine what angle we were looking at. And we're going to look at angle of elevation and angle of depression. So on your notes, you can see two pictures that represent angle of elevation and angle of depression. And it pretty well describes it. It depends on where you're standing. You can see the little person in both of these examples is standing at this angle. So for example, on this angle of elevation one, I can see the little person standing at A. And angle of elevation comes from your line of sight and then goes up. So typically when we talk about an angle of elevation of the sun or something like that, we're looking at the angle in between the horizontal or the ground and what goes up if you looked up. Okay. An angle of depression. So if you look at the angle of depression, what you can see is that it represented by the angle from the little man looking down. So picture the horizon or your eye level and down. So this is my angle of depression. Now, what we hope you remember from the beginning of the year is that if we have two lines, so picture these two lines on the angle of depression diagram. Notice that if I connect the horizontal line and the actual ground, they create two parallel lines. And then we have this line going down. If you notice, these are parallel lines cut by a transversal. What that means is that the angle of depression is actually equivalent to the angle of elevation if we're standing where the guy is in the boat. So the guy in the boat would be looking up at the lighthouse. That would be the angle of elevation. Whereas the little stick figure standing at the lighthouse looking down is the angle of depression. Okay, so let's go through our 4 steps again. Sorry, I think we just had 3. Let's go through our 3 steps to be able to solve a trig word problem. Remember, the first step that we had was to draw a triangle. So we want to draw a triangle. Remember the second step, and these should be on the front of your notes, the second step is to label the triangle with the given information. I'm just going to draw a labeled triangle. And remember the third step then is to create and solve a trig equation. So we are going to create equation and solve. So those are our 3 steps that we're going to go through. So today what we're going to do is look at 2 examples that specifically deal with just angle of elevation and angle of depression. All right, here is the first example. So it says, from the top of a fire tower, a forest ranger sees his partner on the ground at an angle of depression of 40 degrees. If the tower is 45 feet in height, how far apart is the partner from the base of the tower to the nearest tenth of a foot? So let's look at what we're given. Okay, they gave us that the angle of depression was, right here is 40 degrees. So this 40 degrees is represented by the guy in the fire tower's line of sight and down. Well, what I know about parallel lines is it means that this angle down here also needs to be 40 degrees. Okay, so 40 degrees is my angle of depression. The tower is 45 feet in height, which they labeled right here for us. And we want to know how far apart the partner is. Okay, so now we need to go back to what we remember to do. The triangle is already drawn. It's actually already labeled for us, although we did transfer the angle of depression into the triangle that's given. And now we need to create and solve an equation. So the first step I'm going to go through and do with that is I'm going to picture what my triangle looks like. I am trying to solve for the missing side x, and I'm going to picture myself as standing right where the partner is, the guy that's standing on the ground. Okay? So if I'm standing here where he's at, what I know is that this 90 degrees always points to the hypotenuse, so I'm going to go ahead and label that as my hypotenuse. So we'll just call it HYP. And again, if I'm standing where this guy is, I know that the part that I'm standing on is the adjacent leg. And then I know what he's looking at across from him is the opposite leg. So we're going to call this opposite. Okay, so now I need to go back to that mnemonic device. Remember I said it would be a good idea to write this at the top of every paper, because then we can easily identify which trig ratio we want to use. So SOHCAHTOA. Okay, here we go. If I'm here with this guy, I see that I'm trying to solve for the adjacent side, and I'm given the opposite side. So which trig ratio uses adjacent and opposite? Not necessarily in that order. Well, I know adjacent and opposite is represented by the trig equation tangent. So here we go. We're going to write our tangent equation. So I'm going to say that the tangent of the angle, so tangent of 40 degrees, equals the opposite, which is 45, over the adjacent, which is x. Okay, remember, this is when we're solving where the variable was in the denominator. So I actually have to take a couple steps. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by x, because I need to bring the x out of the denominator. So when I do that, I get x times the tangent of 40 degrees equals 45. And then I need to get x by itself. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to divide both sides by the tangent of 40. And if I divide both sides by the tangent, oops, don't know what happened there, tangent of 40, we will be able to solve this. So I'm going to type x equals 45 divided by the tangent of 40 degrees. And now I can type that into my calculator. Okay, so when I type this into my calculator, I get that x equals 53.6, says nearest tenth of a foot, so we're going to round it there. 53.6 feet is how far the partner is away. All right, well, let's try the last example, and notice this one doesn't have a diagram again, which is the first thing. We want to practice being able to draw a diagram that fits what's happening. Okay, find the angle of elevation of the sun when a 12.5 meter tall telephone pole casts an 18 meter long shadow. So like I said, I just like to draw just a good old generic triangle, right triangle. And so I am going to call this my telephone pole, and then this one will be my shadow. So that's what the scribbly line is. It's the shadow. All right. Find the angle of elevation. Well, remember that angle of elevation is the angle that from the horizon up. So my angle of elevation will be this angle, and this is what I'm trying to find, is this x. Okay, well, let's finish labeling it. It says that the telephone pole is 12.5 meters. So we're going to label this as 12.5. And then the shadow, which is on the ground, is 18 meters. So we're going to label that as 18. Well, now I want to go through and figure out what each side is that I'm given. So I'm going to start by where I'm standing. So I'm going to picture myself standing at the angle I'm trying to find. So here I am at that angle. And what I know is that across from the 90, that 90 degrees always points to the hypotenuse. So we'll just label this hypotenuse, although we don't need that side this time. And then across from the guy that's standing there, me, I guess that's me, across from me is the opposite side. So we're going to label that side opposite. And then the side I'm standing on would be the adjacent side. So if I were to pick a trig ratio, remember we know that the mnemonic device is SOHCAHTOA. If I were to pick a trig ratio, I would look at what I'm given. And here's what I know. I know the opposite side, and I know the adjacent side, and I'm trying to find the angle. Okay, well, what trig ratio uses opposite and adjacent? The trig ratio we want is the tangent. So let's set up our equation. I'm going to start by saying the tangent of the angle. Well, I don't know this angle, so this is going to go down as x. So the tangent of x equals the opposite over the adjacent. So 12.5 over 18. Okay, so how do we solve for an angle? Remember, to undo the tangent from each side, or from the side that's attached to the x, what I need to do is I need to take the tangent inverse. I need to undo tangent from the x so that I can get x by itself. So I'm going to do the tangent inverse on both sides. Now, what I know is that when I do the tangent inverse of the tangent of x, that reduces just to be x equals. So what I'm typing in my calculator is the tangent inverse of 12.5 over 18. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in my calculator, just like before. Make sure your calculator is still in degree mode. So 12.5 divided by 18, the tangent inverse of that gives me that x equals 34.8 if we round, and we found a degree. So that angle of elevation of the sun is 34.8 degrees. Okay, so now is your turn to try it. You have a worksheet that you're going to be working on today, and you get to try your trig word problems. Thank you guys. Have a good day.